This term, monopolistic competition, is made up of two parts, monopolistic and competition. In some ways, monopolistic competition is similar to perfect competition, and in some ways, it's similar to pure monopoly. So, the ways that it's similar to perfect competition is number one, there will be many, many sellers, and number two, it's relatively easy to enter the market. You can enter the market relatively easy if you want to set up your own ramen shop, ramen being a monopolistically competitive industry, or fast food or retail clothing. These are all examples of monopolistic competition. And it's relatively easy to get into these industries in comparison to doing something like automotive production or building of cars or aircraft or tires or something where it takes a lot of capital to get started in that industry. The ways that monopolistic competitors are similar to monopolists is that each monopolistic competitor tries to sell a unique product. They try to differentiate their product as much as possible, making their ramen special ramen or their jeans a special jeans, so that there's no exact other product as theirs. They use a lot of non-price competition to establish that, but there are, however, many, many very close substitutes. Now, demand for the monopolistic competitor is downward sloping, even though it is relatively more elastic than a monopolist's demand curve, because it has many close substitutes. If you remember the things that make a demand curve relatively more elastic, it's those SLIT things, the slit characteristics. So the S in that is the number of substitutes. The more substitutes, the more elastic. So this curve is relatively flat, but because it's downward sloping, it means that if the monopolistic competitor wants to sell more quantities, they'll have to lower the price of the product. And when they lower the price of the product, they have to lower the price for all of the previous quantities sold before it too. So not just the one additional quantity, but all of the additional quantities, and that's why marginal revenue will be below demand, just like for the monopolist, the non-price discriminating monopolist. Now I'm going to lay over these cost curves. The cost curves are the same as the cost curves for all the other graphs that we've been doing. So you have a happy face AVC, you have an ATC that gets closer and closer, and an MC curve that hooks through the lowest points of ATC and AVC. So I've just laid those on. They're just put on top of the demand and marginal revenue curves that are downward sloping there. The same thing, however, is going to hold in which you find profit max, and that's at the magic point where MC equals MR, and that point is going to be right here at the intersection of the MC and MR curves, and that tells us the magic quantity that is the profit max quantity for this seller. We assume they'll make that quantity, and so at that quantity we want to know what the price of the product will be and what the per unit cost will be. So the price of that quantity is found off of the demand curve right here, and so we know that they will charge this price, the highest price customers are willing to pay for that quantity, and then the per unit cost is off of the ATC curve, the average total cost curve, and because the average total costs are below the per unit price, we know that they are making per unit economic profit. If we want to know the total profit, we would take the per unit economic profit height here and multiply it by the number of units, which is the width here. And so the height times the width will be a rectangle shape, and this is the rectangle, the area of economic profit. Now, when the monopolist was making economic profit, the monopolist knows that they can enjoy those economic profits without them being challenged. But for the monopolistic competitor, they're not going to be able to enjoy that. They're going to have a situation where other firms are going to join the industry in the long run because it's relatively easy to get into the industry, like into ramen. Then the other firms will join the industry enticed by these extra good news economic profits. When the firms join the industry, these competitors will steal some of your customers away, and therefore with less customers for your product, demand for your product will decrease. So as new firms join, they're going to steal away your customers. You'll lose customers to these new competitors, these new ramen shops, and demand for your product will decrease, and therefore the marginal revenue curve will also decrease with the new demand curve. So to see it in action, here we go, the demand and marginal revenue curves decrease, and what's going to happen in the long run is that demand is going to end up tangent to ATC at a point where, and at that quantity is going to be the quantity where MC equals MR. So it's going to look, the final product, the long run, is going to look something like this. So you can see here that at the place where MC equals MR, in other words, their profit maximizing quantity where we assume they're going to operate, at that quantity where MC equals MR, we will find that right above that, the ATC is tangent to demand. And what that means is that at the quantity, the MC equals MR quantity, the price will equal ATC. And if price is equal to your ATC, then there is 0 per unit economic profit and therefore 0 area of economic profit at all. And that's what the long run looks like for the monopolistic competitor. So just to stress that in the long run, the monopolistic competitor will earn no economic profit. So let's now talk about the monopolistic competitor and levels of efficiency. And so we're going to ask if in the long run, does the monopolistic competitor achieve either productive or allocative efficiency? So first we'll focus on productive efficiency. In order for them to be achieving productive efficiency, it would have to be such that the price that they are charging is equal to minimum ATC. So if we look at this monopolistic competitor in long-run equilibrium, we can see that here's the price that they'd be charging, and yet here is the minimum ATC level, and so you can see that the price they're charging is not equal to minimum ATC, and therefore, no, they will not achieve productive efficiency. As far as allocative efficiency, we're going to look to see, if they're allocatively efficient, then it must be that price equals marginal cost. So once again, here's the price that they're charging, but at that quantity, this is the marginal cost. And we can very clearly see that the price they're charging is not equal to marginal cost. So no, they do not achieve allocative efficiency either. So here's the thing with the monopolistically competitive producer. They reach a long-run equilibrium, but they will not achieve productive or allocative efficiency like a purely competitive industry would. So we're going to put the monopolistically competitive industry, the firm, next to the purely competitive firm to compare the two industries and see where the differences are. So here you see that they're both going to operate where MC equals MR. The difference is that the demand and MR curves are different for the monopolistic competitor, whereas they're equal to each other for the perfect competitor. And demand is horizontal for the perfect competitor. In perfect competition, in the long run, the price will equal minimum ATC and it will equal MC. They will achieve, the perfect competitor will achieve both productive and allocative efficiency, and they will produce a quantity that goes along with minimum ATC. You can see for the monopolistic competitor, however, on the left, that the output they make is going to be less than the perfectly competitive industry because the output they will make, the monopolistic competitor will make, will be less than the minimum ATC quantity. So there's a difference between the two quantities, and we call that difference excess capacity. Excess capacity is going to be the difference in quantity that the monopolistic competitor makes compared to what the perfect competitor would make in the long run. In other words, the minimum ATC quantity compared to the profit max quantity in the long run for a monopolistic competitor. That's what excess capacity is.